freedom as they were reunited with their loved ones. And this comes after years of tense negotiations with Iran. I spoke with a source close to one of the prisoners who said that on the plane ride here, they had lamb and wine on the plane, and one of the prisoners wasn't a fan of the wine, or wouldn't have been in his previous life, but he said that this cup was just so amazing because he had been in captivity for so many years. Now, the brother of another one of the prisoners spoke on the tarmac just a short time after they were reunited. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We're so grateful to be together after 8 years. It's unbelievable. Almost 8 years to the day. It's unbelievable. We're so grateful. It's just, we feel like it's a dream. The nightmare is finally over. The real hero of this story, surviving 8 years of brutal treatment, but never losing hope. And showing what happens when you're hopeful, when you fight.
Felt like a dream. It was surreal. It was unbelievable. Those are all things that family members are now saying. Now, Chris, as you know, this prisoner swap has been controversial. Republican critics of the Biden administration say that the money that was unfrozen, the $6 billion, essentially amounted to a ransom payment. But today, the Biden administration is pushing back strongly on that, saying that this was not U.S. taxpayer money, and also saying
Dave,
that
I need
the
to interrupt you because we need to go to the United Nations now. We are seeing President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, beginning his address to the General Assembly. Let's take a listen.
Thank you very much.
I want to say something about the individuals, about the $6 billion. There's no doubt that each and every person's life is valuable to the very T. There's no doubt that in the eyes of God, each soul is just as valuable as the next. I want to ask my audience, which would sound more reasonable, to give $6 billion to a known terrorist group that has declared war on the American people, that have caused all kinds of havoc, and that, if the truth be known, they already have nuclear access or nuclear bombs, versus $750 million on giving it to a fund for the initial people that went through what they had to go through regarding the Oklahoma bombing, pertaining to the fault of another branch of government prior to that, 2 years prior to that, pertaining to the ATF and how that they handled their affairs down in Texas pertaining to the Davidians, the Waco incident, Mount Carmel Waco incident. Which would sound more practical to you? To try to right a wrong that had been occurred in people's lives, that actually costed them their loved ones, costed them their lives, versus supposedly saving these lives for that kind of money, and knowing that we're not supposed to be negotiating with terrorist known entities, and knowing that that money that Biden is talking about towards it not being ours is just about as full of it as I don't know what can be full of it. But let's listen to what this man here has to say, because I'm sure he's got some interesting things that he wants to say.
Take a listen.
Thank you very much. I welcome all who stand for common efforts, and I promise, being really united, we can guarantee fair peace for all nations. What's more, unity can prevent wars. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, fellow leaders, this call saw many wars, but not as active defender against the aggressions. In many cases, the fear of war, the final war, was the loudest here, the war after which no one would gather in the General Assembly Hall again. The Third World War was seen as a nuclear war, a conflict between states on the highway to nukes. Other wars seemed less scary compared to a threat of the so-called great powers firing their nuclear stockpiles. So the 20th century taught the world to restrain from the use of the weapons of mass destruction, not to deploy, not to proliferate, not to threaten with, and not to test, but to promote a complete nuclear disarmament. Frankly, this is a good strategy, but it should not be the only strategy to protect the world from the final war. Ukraine gave up its third largest nuclear arsenal. The world then decided Russia should become a keeper of such power. Yet history shows it was Russia who deserved nuclear disarmament the most back in 1990s. And Russia deserves it now. Terrorists have no right to hold nuclear weapons. No right. But truly, not the nukes are the scariest now. While nukes remain in place, the mass destruction is gaining its momentum. The aggressor is weaponizing many other things, and those things are used not only against our country, but against all of yours as well. Fellow leaders, there are many conventions that restrict weapons, but there are no real restrictions on weaponization. First, let me give you an example. The food. Since the start of the full-scale war, the Ukrainian ports in the Black and Azov seas have been blocked by Russia. Until now, our ports on the Danube River remain the target for missiles and drones. And it is a clear Russia's attempt to weaponize the food shortage on the global market in exchange for recognition for some, if not all, of the captured territories. Russia is launching the food prices as weapons. The impact spans from the Atlantic coast of Africa to the Southeast Asia, and this is the threat scale. And I would like to thank those leaders who supported our Black Sea Grain Initiative and program Grain from Ukraine. Thank you so much. United, we made weapons turn back into food again. More than 45 nations saw how important it is to make Ukrainian food products available on the market. From Algeria to Spain to Indonesia and China. And even now, when Russia has undermined the Black Sea Grain Initiative, we are working to ensure food stability. And I hope that many of you will join us in these efforts. We launched a temporary sea export corridor from our ports, and we are working hard to preserve the land routes for grain exports. And it is alarming to see how some in Europe, some our friends in Europe, play out solidarity in political theater, making thriller from the grain. And they may seem to play their own role, but in fact, they are helping set the stage to a Moscow actor. Second, weaponization of energy. Many times the world has witnessed Russia using energy as a weapon. Kremlin weaponized oil and gas to weaken the leaders of other countries when they came to the Red Square. And now this threat is even greater. Russia is weaponizing nuclear energy. Not only it is not only it is spreading its unreliable nuclear power plant construction technologies, but it is also turning other countries' power plants into real dirty bombs. Look please what Russia did to our Zaporizhia power plant. Shelled it, occupied it, and now blackmails others with radiation leaks. Is there any sense to reduce nuclear weapons when Russia is weaponizing nuclear power plants? Scary question. The global security architecture offers no response or protection against such a treacherous radiation threat, and there is no accountability for radiation blackmailers so far. The third example is children. Unfortunately, various terrorist groups abduct children to put pressure on their families and societies. But never before the mass kidnapping and deportation would become a part of the government policy. Not until now. We know the names of tens of thousands of children and have evidence on hundreds of thousands of others kidnapped by Russia in the occupied territories of Ukraine and later deported. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrant for Putin for this crime.
I want to stop right there for a second. Why do you think they would be doing that? Think for a second. They're getting the youngest. They're bringing them back over to Russia. They're going to retrain them. They're going to brainwash them. They're going to convince them of their ideologies. That way, once they become adults in this big war that he's talking about, that's going to expand even deeper, further than just Ukraine, then he'll have his fighting army. The Russian government will have their fighting army to the extent that there will not be no conscientious objectives in going and invading all them other countries. This is a long-term strategy that even Ronald Reagan himself said that what they was doing and what they was up to was under the pretense of being an evil empire. After the Berlin Wall fell, after their currency fell, they revved up their oligarch engines again in the prospect of trying to look more civilized in the eyes of the world, the national world. Saudi Arabia and other countries have done it too as well. They've tried to clean their act up a little bit. But even a lot of them that tries to clean up their act, you know what their hidden agendas are towards wanting to dominate and dictate all the women. And if you're not brainwashed in believing the way that they believe, and a lot of times worshiping the way that they worship, you'll be kicked to the side. You'll be considered an outcast. But my point being is this: evil is evil. No matter how you try to disguise it, no matter how you try to improvise it, no matter how you try to compromise it, evil is still evil with evil motives. And there's no doubt that this man right here has been taken completely out of his comfort zone towards being I guess he was like an entertainer or somebody that told jokes and made people laugh. He was in his own comfort zone before this occurred, and he was allotted this job. Now all of a sudden, this man is having to deal with sacrificial problems, not just pertaining to his own life, not just pertaining to his family's life, but millions of other lives that has been affected by this poisonous government that has tried to change its identity, but in reality has not changed no identity. Whenever the Russian government talks about itself being cheated, in a sense, it did get cheated. And the way that it got cheated is that the things that the Americans was teaching and preaching and telling them about, they never fully pursued it. A matter of fact, as far as I'm concerned, they never pursued it at all, not in the aspect of actually pursuing it. They talked about the Antichrist, they talked about the one world government, they talked about the two witnesses, they talked about the false prophet, they talked about the New World Order, but they never actually, the church world never actually pursued it. So in a sense, Russia did get cheated, because now they're deviating into plan number B, because now everybody and their brother can see how the world is warming up from the inside out, and it's just a matter of time before the prophecies will be fulfilled, that as you shall see the days approaching, that no flesh shall be saved, but those who God has appointed, as far as the elect, those days will be shortened. Now they can see that plan A has completely failed. They can blame it on the economical aspect of it, pertaining to COVID, and how that we did not promise them nothing in regards to that. But the fact of the matter is, whenever you have oligarchs that are so dedicated in wanting to feed their own pockets, until you have an actual uprising in that country for an onslaught of getting rid of those oligarchs, you're going to continue to have evil that's dominating their citizenship in that area. And it's not just happening in Russia. It's happening in China. It's happening in other parts of the country too as well. And it's really bad whenever it comes to a humanitarian right perspective, because even myself have been a victim of being violated again and again and again ever since I stood out into the eyes of the general public, going all the way back to 1989. So in a sense, yes and no, Russia has been cheated. But at the same time, the whole world has been cheated, because these discoveries of prophecies was only discussed with a few people and hidden behind doors. And it's only been until just recently, because of social media and me, the individual that's talking in behind the camera right now, towards being so dead set, forceful, whatever word you want to use, hard-headed, passionate. I could go on and on with words, but it's only been because of social media that has been able to get my message out to the general public, because of the way that even to this day we're still being rejected, still being treated as an outcast. And whenever I say we, it's not me. It's not me and 1,000 others that stand with me. Whenever I say we, I'm talking about the Lord Jesus Christ and the heavenly host pertaining to God Almighty and myself. Because I know that it was delegated through a spiritual anointing for me to bring forth this message. Now those around here will convince themselves, oh, this guy called Juby, he's got a wild imagination. He's just imagining all this stuff. Well, you can say whatever you want to say about being a Juby denier, but you know, the fact of the matter is, the climate deniers, all these lies that they have not only bought into themselves but tried to lead everybody else down the road of believing, now that is catching up with them too as well. And eventually it will catch up with them full circle, to the point that if anybody even claims one day that climate denying is true, they'll probably get slapped in the face or knocked in the face by somebody. Who knows, they may even imprison them. Because that's the very thing that has got us in the trouble that we're in right now, pretending to seeing all the abnormalities with the forces of nature. It's just unbelievable how much money just in the Western world alone, in America alone, that this has costed the insurance companies. Not counting what it has costed the taxpayers. That's one of the reasons why that we're in the shape that we're in right now towards being $30+ trillion in debt, is because of all the catastrophes. And if you don't believe me, you can look it up for yourself. And the catastrophes are only growing in intensity because ordinarily real estate goes up and the storms have become more forceful and they become more frequent. So as you start tallying your tallies, they only get deeper into the red as we go further along. And if you'll add that on top of the drug problem, on top of the illegal immigrant problem, on top of all the other problems, my friends, we are as a runaway train fixing to run off the edge of the cliff. And people like myself are trying to stop people from running off the cliff. I believe that this individual right here is telling the world, in a sense, that hey, if we stick together, there is at least a chance that we can defeat this thing. But if we start breaking apart and separating ourselves and start fighting amongst ourselves, then there's no doubt that communism will win over democracy. And if that's the direction that we want to go in, towards basically having no say-so in basically being dominated and dictated to, then continue on the path that we're on, because that's the path that we're going in. You keep in mind, a lot of them countries over there, those women over there, they don't have no rights at all. That means if a man decides that he wants to get in that woman's pants, he tells that woman. He don't ask that woman. He tells that woman, I want you. I'm going to take you. And regardless of how much that woman begs, cries, or resists, that bully is still going to take what he wants to take. And it's not just that way with the women. It's that way with the men too. The boys, especially the younger ones, towards them being violated and abused. And that's just one particular entity that I'm talking about, pertaining to a sexual entity. Then you can get into the dynamics of other entities that people get taken advantage of. And to be quite frank with you, these people right here, even though this guy was a comedian that told jokes, made people laugh, they would rather die than to give in to poisonous Putin and his evil oligarchs that even Ronald Reagan said years ago was in fact the evil empire. That's what we're up against. That is exactly what we're up against. We are up against the powers of evil right now, and if good does not stick together, we may very well break apart. You know, whenever I come back here in Northwest Tennessee, after me doing a lot of studying and research and going here and going there and looking at this and looking at that, then it was time for me to conform and put all this material together. After I really got to thinking about how come the resistance was so powerful here in this particular area, was based around what went on either during or before or after the Civil War era. Regardless whether it was fumigated from KKK, or it was fumigated from the Night Riders down in Reelfoot Lake, or it was fumigated pertaining to the Civil War, the bottom line, it was fumigated by evil. And that is a aspect, especially in this area, that people still have never gotten over. In other words, they're still as prejudiced today. They're still as biased today as what they was back even during that era, towards basically being hate mongering people because they don't look like them, they don't talk like them, they don't act like them. Judging people off the color of their skin versus their character. And it's wrong. And it's evil. And what poisonous Putin over there is doing is evil. And this man right here that you're looking at, Zelensky, is trying to open the eyes of the world towards nuclear armament versus nuclear disarmament of where this all could be going.
And we are trying to get children back home. But time goes by. What will happen with them? What will happen to them? Those children in Russia are taught to hate Ukraine, and all ties with their families are broken. And this is clearly a genocide. When hatred is weaponized against one nation, it never stops there. Each decade, Russia starts a new war. Parts of Moldova and Georgia remain occupied. Russia turned Syria into ruins. And if not Russia, the chemical weapons would have never been used there in Syria. Russia has almost swallowed Belarus. It is obviously threatening Kazakhstan and other Baltic states. And the goal of the present war against Ukraine is to turn our land, our people, our lives, our resources into a weapon against you, against the international rules-based order. Many seats in the General Assembly Hall may become empty if Russia succeeds with its treachery and aggression. Ladies and gentlemen, the aggressor scatters deaths and brings ruins even without nukes, but the outcomes are alike. We see towns, we see villages in Ukraine wiped out by Russian artillery, leveled to the ground completely. We see the war of drones. We know the possible effects of spreading the war into the cyberspace. The artificial intelligence could be trained to combat well before it would learn to help the humanity. Thank God, people have not yet learned to use climate as a weapon. Even though humanity is failing on its climate policy objectives, this means that extreme weather will still impact the normal global life, and some evil state will also weaponize its outcomes. And when people in the streets of New York and other cities of the world went out on climate protests, we all have seen them. And when people in Morocco and Libya and other countries die as a result of natural disasters, and when islands and countries disappear underwater, and when tornadoes and deserts are spreading into new territories, and when all of this is happening, one unnatural disaster in Moscow decided to launch a big war and kill tens of thousands of people. We have to stop it. We must act united to defeat the aggressor and focus all our capabilities and energy on addressing these challenges. As nukes are restrained, likewise the aggressor must be restrained, and all his tools and methods of war. Each war now can become final, but it takes our unity to make sure that aggression will not break in again. And it is not a dialogue between the so-called great powers somewhere behind the closed doors that can guarantee us all the new wars era, but open war of all nations for peace. Last year I presented the outlines of the Ukrainian peace formula at the UN General Assembly. Later, an Indonesia, I presented the full formula, and over the past year, the peace formula became the basis to update the existing security architecture. Now we can bring back to life the UN Charter and guarantee the full power for the rules-based world order. And tomorrow, I will present the details at a special meeting of the UN Security Council. The main thing is that it is not only about Ukraine. More than 140 states and international organizations have supported the Ukrainian peace formula fully or in part. The Ukrainian peace formula is becoming global. Its points offer solutions and steps that will stop all forms of weaponization that Russia used against Ukraine and other countries and may be used by other aggressors. Look, for the first time in modern history, we have a real chance to end the aggression on the terms of the nation which was attacked. And this is a real chance for every nation to ensure that aggression against your state, if it happens, God forbid, will end. Not because your land will be divided and you will be forced to submit to military or political pressure, but because your territory and sovereignty will be fully restored. We launched the format of meetings between national security advisors and diplomatic representatives. Important talks and consultations were held in Hiroshima, in Copenhagen, and in Jeddah on the implementation of the peace formula. And we are preparing a global peace summit. And please, I invite all of you who do not tolerate any aggression to jointly prepare the summit. And I am aware of the attempts to make some shady dealings behind the scenes. Evil cannot be trusted. Ask Prigozhin if one bets on Putin's promises. Please hear me. Let unity decide everything openly. While Russia is pushing the world to the final war, Ukraine is doing everything to ensure that after Russian aggression, no one in the world will dare to attack any nation. Weaponization must be restrained. War crimes must be punished. Deported people must come back home. And the occupier must return to their own land. We must be united to make it, and we'll do it. Slava Ukraini!
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
What a responsibility to be thrown upon to the shoulders of an individual that, like I said, before he taken on this position, was a comedian that would do comedian acts in front of people and make them laugh. And now this has abruptly been forced up into his life and up into his family's life. That has been just remarkable, to say the least, in how that this individual has fought and continues to fight for the dignity of not just his own people, but the world in general pertaining to democracy. The things that he just got through talking about pertaining to Russia government is in fact true. But also the things that I've been talking about pertaining to the church world here in the Western world is also true, in how that they just didn't only let the founder of the Windmill Ministries down, but they let the world down because they did not pursue that in which what they taught as far as a fulfilling pursuitment. They never did get in behind the founder of the Windmill Ministries pertaining to the crown of thorns, pertaining to the opening of the seal, the first seal, pertaining of Satan now walking around in a fleshly body that's over in Saudi Arabia, pertaining to the two witnesses that will come together. I want to say this that I haven't brought up, I don't think, in none of my literature. And of course, whenever you put out as much literature as what I put out, it's kind of hard to remember everything. So you base your familiarities pertaining to your testimony off of telling the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. And as long as I stick to the truth in regards towards what has occurred in my life, I can remember the truth in what has occurred. It was shortly after the proceedings of the 9 tapes going to the White House that, if I'm not mistaken, Brother Price was still the minister at that time. He didn't remain the minister maybe about a year or two after that. Of course, there was a separation after my particular home church burnt, First Baptist there in Sidonia, and they rebuilt it back. There was a separation along about 76, 77, where the church basically split. So some of this stuff, remembering it verbatim, can get a little confusing, but they was having a revival at the Assembly of God Church where Brother Price was preaching at the time. And I'll never forget that a minister from Texas was sent there to help to hold a revival. I think it was a revival. And this minister got up there and he taught on the unblemished heifer. And he taught on end-time biblical Bible prophecies pertaining to how that this is all lining up with the doomsday devil's duel in regards towards the two witnesses that will come together in the last days fighting against evil fighting against good. I listened to that minister very, very carefully. And he also brought up the same guy that I'm talking about in his message, that God had sent him in a dream going down into the pits of hell in this vision that he was in. And while he was in this vision, this dream of being in the pits of hell, there were screamings and hollerings and unlike anything that anybody could ever imagine that was going on pertaining to the sufferings that was happening. And he kept watching these individuals that was down in the pits of hell. They was walking around and they would reach down and grab a person and pull them out of the flames of fire, and they'd look at them and then let them back down into the flames of fire again, and they'd move on and grab somebody else and do the same thing again. They'd pick them up, look at them, let them down, pick them up, look at them, let them down. And the vision or the dream was over with. And it was a very odd dream, and it bothered the guy, and he kept praying to God, God, what did all that mean? What did that dream mean? How come you let me have a dream like that I was in the pits of hell and these people was doing that? And later God revealed to him just exactly what it was. It was the people that had been misled by other people, that had been told that it was okay if you went out here and you committed adultery. It was okay if you went out here and you cheated on your income tax. It was okay if you went out here and you murdered or you done whatever. That those people was looking for those people in the pits of hell, because those people had been misled. This was the very same guy, I believe, if my thought patterns is right. That's a long time to go back. That's like going back like 50 years ago, but almost 50 years ago. But the individual that preached on the unblemished heifer was an awakening call for me to understand biblical Bible prophecy. And I had only heard that one other time beyond that time of the unblemished heifer that will be used as a sacrifice in the last days pertaining to the doomsday devil's duel, where the two witnesses will come together in a actual brawl or a actual fight. Daniel speaks about this. Also talks about the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, that when you shall start to see these things occurring or starting to occur, to know that the end is nigh, that the end is at hand. And if you put all those prophecies with the facts towards what has been going on now for the past, I guess, 50 years, in constantly draining the oil without nobody really paying a whole lot of attention to what was going on, other than maybe a few people like Al Gore, that it's only been just within the past couple years since Biden has gotten on board pertaining to the Green New Deal that people started taking these things more serious. But they still haven't gotten serious enough pertaining to what's actually occurring. Part of it is what's going on with our atmosphere, as far as the global world itself warming up, getting hotter. But the other part is what we're doing to the underneath our feet in draining out all the oil. And basically, we're walking and talking on a walking time bomb right now. And as we're draining the oil, continue to keep draining the oil out of the ground, the tick-tock is getting closer. The time is getting even closer and closer together towards major catastrophes, because whenever it talks in the Bible about locusts will come out of the earth that will have the sting of 7 times greater than a scorpion, something obviously is going to have to happen for the earth to open up and cause that to do that. And it also talks in the Bible how God will come back and destroy those who are destroying the earth. If it wasn't possible for humans to destroy the earth, it never would have been recorded in the Bible towards God coming back and destroying them who are destroying the earth. We are at a pivotal point right now that President Biden has mentioned just as of today, towards either going to the far right or far left. We are at a pivotal point. But as long as this ministry becomes dormant, because that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted that 30 plus years ago. They didn't want this ministry to succeed. They didn't want this ministry to take center stage. They didn't want the individual that's talking to you right now in behind the camera for him to ever succeed. And in a sense, it wasn't me that they was contradicting. The whole time they was contradicting biblical Bible prophecy. They was contradicting God, that has got the world in the shape that it's in. So whenever somebody like Putin gets on national TV and says we have been cheated, I can relate to what he's talking about, because they themselves bought in to the Antichrist theory. They themselves bought into the opening of the first seal. They themselves bought in to the ideology of the two witnesses, the Antichrist, the one world government, the new world order, etc., etc., etc. But nobody over here in the Western world was willing to act upon to those things. In the meantime, somebody like me kept steadily putting out material, and every time the heat would get too hot, I would have to play dead man's bluff. And I'm really surprised that I hadn't already been attacked by some judge or some attorney or some doctor that decides we're going to go after Mr. Jackson and we're going to show him how the cow eats the cabbage. We're going to throw him back through the ringer. We're going to load him up. We're going to take him down to Bolivar, and we're going to fill him full of all kinds of Thorazine and all other kinds of drugs, and we're going to teach him to never ever stand back up with this message ever again towards explaining his story to the American people. And that was their whole concept beginning in Kenton, Tennessee in 1983, towards punishing me again and again and again. Now, 40 plus years later, since 1983, going into year 2023, 83, 23, that's 40 years. Now it is backfired on them to the degree that now the punishment, the horror, the misery, the sorrow, the anguish has now come back onto them. And even to this day, the very people that was a part of that resistance movement, that some of them are still living over in Kenton, Tennessee, still refuses to acknowledge their wrongs. Not counting the people over here in Weakley County, Tennessee, that still refuses to acknowledge their wrongs. So whenever I talk to my son about people that I'm dealing with and have been dealing with for the past 40 plus years, whenever I talk to him about these people being monsters, that's exactly what they are. They're literal monsters, but they're disguised towards acting like goody-goody two-shoes, or people with law enforcement that they're doing it for the interest of the safety and the well-being of the people. Now it's time that the people awakened, especially the younger generation, if they plan on having any type of future whatsoever. Because I promise you, between the baby boomers and the adults, basically the Grateful Dead followers, the Woodstock era, these are the very people that has led us down this endless road of doom and gloom. And if you want to continue to get closer to the edge of doom and gloom, continue to be a Juby denier, continue to be a environmental denier, continue to be a election denier, continue to keep denying the things that this man just got through telling you about, and eventually we will not just get close to the edge, but we will tumble over it. And when that occurs, that will be the end of civilization as we know it. That will be whenever God tells Gabriel to blow the trumpet. That will be whenever he will come back in flaming fire, surrounding the planet Earth, resurrecting those who are resurrectable, resurrecting those who are worthy, and bringing great anguish and misery to the rest, towards burning down everything that's burnable here on the planet. So continue to continue. So I say this hypocritical. Continue to do what you're doing, and you're going to make it to your goal. You're going to make it to total chaos. You're going to make it to the point that God the Father will throw this great planet off into great tribulation. We have not never seen great tribulation. We have seen different phases of tribulation. We have seen great periods of horror, regardless whether it was the Spanish flu, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, the Civil War, other wars that has happened all over the world, going all the way back to King Kong or whatever his name was, going all the way back to basically the very beginning of time. We have seen eras that literally thought that they was going through great tribulation. And at that time, I'm sure that was a good way to analogize what that they was going through. Because whenever you see death and destruction around you all over, then you begin to wonder, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is what the Bible is talking about pertaining to great tribulation. We have not never went through great tribulation. The world has not never experienced great tribulation. Because if it had, I promise you, it would be just as obvious as the nose on your face, and it would be just as obvious as the great flood. What this man just got through talking about is very, very serious, and I hope the people that get a hold of my particular video will understand that these are very, very serious matters. And to think that my people was willing to put all the load off on my shoulders pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy, and even to this day still not people still do not have people that confront with me, that support me, not just metaphorically, not just spiritually pretending to praying for me, but I'm talking about people that's actually involved in the Bible, that has the same faith in Christ, the Lord Jesus Christ, that is willing to help the individual that's talking to you right now in establishing what needs to be established. But that's just it. The people that I'm talking about, they never did want to establish peace. That's the reason why I reflect back on what I say whenever things is crumbling, topsy-turvy, things is basically blowing up right in front of their faces, that it could not have happened to a better group of people. And I mean that in a remorseful way, not in a happy way, but in a remorseful way, because it was them people that has brought this misery and sorrow into the lives of the innocent. Because, you know, if you do a percentage level towards how many people was actually involved in 1983 in my life over in Kenton, Tennessee, it'd probably be less than 2%. 2% of the population over in Kenton in Obion County was a part of this resistance movement. So it's really sad to see the other 98% suffering on account of the 2%. And we see that here in Weakley County. We see that in other areas, in other people's lives, where basically society right now is suffering, not because of the 2%, but because of the 98%. And the 98% still has yet to come clean, still has yet to admit to their wrongs, still has yet to try to right the wrongs.
Volodymyr Zelensky addressing the General Assembly of the UN, speaking with the passion of a leader whose country's future is at stake. The kind of passion that motivated and sustained his population and his military in the fight for that country, and now that he hopes will convince allies to continue to support the fight for democracy. The overarching message clearly: our fight is your fight. I want to bring in NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel, who is in Ukraine, NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander, and Hagar Chamali is former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the UN and former NSC Director for Syria and Lebanon. It was, I thought, a really well-constructed speech. Look, he said, we always thought the final war, World War III, would be essentially a nuclear holocaust, right? But he said, other wars seem less scary, but there are other threats. The aggressor is weaponizing many other things, not just against our country, but against yours.
Yeah, I thought that was a very compelling point he's making, because he's trying to first to humanize it, right? When he made his comparisons to climate change disasters and say, without trying to dismiss the fatalities you had in other climate change disasters, he's saying this is a man-made or natural disaster coming from Moscow, killing tens of thousands of people, taking children, abducting them. What will it be in the future? That is a genocide. And not only is he trying to paint the picture in real stark terms for folks, but he's trying to explain it's not going to stop there. Russia already is occupying Georgia and Moldova. They already invaded. Syria is in ruins because of Russia. Russia swallowed, I love that he used that term, swallowed Belarus. And we already know that. And by the way, and this is a point I keep making, it's not going to stop at Putin if Putin succeeds at defeating Ukraine. It's going to spread around the world. You're already seeing it. Azerbaijan today struck Nagorno-Karabakh against innocent ethnic Armenians. Why? Because no one's paying attention. Because there's this message that no one will do anything. And that is what he means. It is an attack on democracy all over the world. And if you let the system and institutions crumble, then everybody is at threat. And when he invokes, for example, oil as a weapon, food as a weapon, it's not only true that's the globalization of it, but he's also trying to highlight, by the way, Putin has no cards left other than nuclear. That's why he's attacking. He's trying to inflict pain on everybody. That's how he pursues his policies.
And in fact, Richard Engel, as I pointed out at the top, this was the President Zelensky that really got the attention of the world. This was the man who no one outside pretty much Ukraine had ever heard of before. And suddenly he became someone to rally behind. His country did rally behind him with the help of President Biden. Much of the West rallied behind him. This, however, is without a doubt a rallying cry at a critical time in this war. Talk about what you just heard, Richard.
So I think we've all watched President Zelensky develop in real time since Russia invaded this country a year and a half ago. He was not a well-known international figure before the war. He rose in the headlines of the United States when former President Trump tried to blackmail him and not send weapons to Ukraine unless he got help looking into Biden. But on a global scale, he was not nearly well known. Initially, he did much English, and that struck me that he gave this entire address to a very important world format in English, speaking nearly 20 notes, and repeated several, I think, important themes. He talked about the country's past. He knew he was stressing the world format, and he said that Ukraine effectively was cheated by a world body, that Ukraine, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, gave up its nuclear weapons, that it had a way of protecting itself in the Cold War world, but it gave it up with international assurances from Russia and the United States and other countries. And now Russia is threatening Ukraine with nuclear weapons, and he said has turned Ukraine's nuclear sites into weapons by carrying out attacks near them or taking over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So it was, I thought, quite effective speech because he was doing it in English, which he's gotten much better at. When I've interviewed Zelensky in the past, he often refuses to speak in English, or he'll just answer some questions in English, not give his whole speech in English. So he recognizes the audience. He wants to reach out to Americans. He wants to reach out to English speakers around the world, and he wants to continue to slam that same message that Ukraine was betrayed by an international body before. It needs help. Otherwise, many said in that chamber could lose their own seats if Russia is allowed to continue its war unchecked.
And I can understand exactly how they feel, because they did have an ace in the hole pertaining to their nuclear armament. That could always be used, if nothing else, for a bluff of telling somebody like Putin that if you invade us, we'll use these nukes on you. Well, whenever the Ukrainians made the deal, they made the deal. Excuse me. Something went down my lungs. They made the deal up to the pretense the American people would take care of them. And that's the part that I agree with. Their ace in the hole got taken away. And now look at them.
Going to bring to Washington, D.C. He'll be meeting with President Biden, who obviously has seen as a major foreign policy win that he has been able to get countries behind and keep countries behind this war that he sees as a threat to democracy. Little tougher sell in some parts of Congress. What are we looking for when we see Volodymyr Zelensky come to Washington?
You're right, President Biden has been able to keep the world community together on this so far, but the toughest community to keep together may be in the halls of Congress when Volodymyr Zelensky goes there later this week. We're hearing from Republicans, even in anticipation of this visit. Basically, we got no money to give right now. And strikingly, about 55% of Americans right now say they oppose authorizing additional funds to Ukraine right now. Basically, 73% $23 billion is his one estimate that's been spent for humanitarian efforts and for the war effort. They say that is the end of the line. So this is going to be a critical trip for Zelensky when he comes, meeting with President Biden at the White House. They're going to have a visit earlier in the day with lawmakers. Zelensky will. He's going to deliver remarks likely that day as well. But this, I think, was the best case that anyone can make for Ukraine is from Volodymyr Zelensky himself. His first in-person visit to the UN General Assembly. It's why I think, and in conversations with advisors to the president, only part of his remarks today really focused on Ukraine. They knew that this was going to be the act that everyone was waiting to hear from. Zelensky making the case on his own behalf. And there are a lot of challenges around the world. One of the challenges that you, Hagar, were just trying to make is the point to sort of connect this to those developing countries as well, why they should care. Food insecurity, the rising price of food right now in large part is due to the Russian invasion in Ukraine. He has to make all communities recognize why they should care about this war.
But yet, no, they don't never mention OPEC pertaining to the Middle East and how that they have purposely diminished some of the supplies that has also raised the price and also towards what went on last year towards Exxon, Valdez, Shell, and all of them, especially OPEC, that profited off of the world price gouging that has put us where we are right now, in addition to COVID, in addition to the war, towards bringing that much more misery into people's lives. They refuse
care about
And
to
again,
mention OPEC.
in English, in ways that people can understand. Children being ripped out of their homes, being taken to Russia against their will, their parents not knowing where they are. The idea of food insecurity, of people, of children literally starving to death. This broader picture that he wants to bring to the United States in terms that anyone, you don't have to have a PhD in geopolitics to understand what he's talking about.
Absolutely, he's incredibly compelling. And one of the things that'll be very interesting, this is almost the prelude to his visit in Washington, where it comes at a time, as I believe Mike mentioned, the White House has been asking for billions of dollars in support. I believe it's $24 billion in support for Ukraine. And it is a very precarious time. Things are going to get very difficult and heated in the run-up to the election year, where you've got a number of Republican candidates and their base against continued support for Ukraine. And so there's a little bit of this race against time as well, just in case how things turn out. And Zelensky is aware of that. And so when he gets to Washington, he's going to now this was the public effort to play on people's heartstrings so that they could feel it. There are tens of thousands of kids, I believe it's over 10,000 or 10,000 children who have been abducted and taken to Russia. And when they've been returned, it's about 25 or 30 at a time. He was right. They have a long way to go.
It's awful.
And it's what they're doing will have long-lasting effects.
It's awful.
It is absolutely genocide. And that's why there's this arrest warrant for Putin, who's been labeled a war criminal. When he gets to Washington, I expect his closed-door meetings with members of Capitol Hill to be extremely compelling, and where I do think that hopefully Thursday we'll see more, because every time he visits, he walks out with some really good deliverables, and it's because he really knows how to make a good argument.
And Peter will be back in Washington to cover that. Peter, thank you for that. Hagar Shamali. Of course, always Richard Engel. Thank you so much, all of you. Thousands of demonstrators flood the streets for Climate Week, turning up the heat and demanding change as global temperatures soar. I'll talk to one prominent name on the front lines of this climate fight. Washington Governor Jay Inslee will join me next.
It's unbelievable. He was making a plea to the public and to the United Nations in response towards this guy, Putin, that is basically trying to light the fuse towards the end of the world, towards the war of all wars. And the thing about it is, he's not the only one that wants to light the fuse. There's North Korea, there's Iran that we just got through doing a deal with. There's all kinds of countries right now that are rising up towards wanting to basically bring the world to its knees. And if we, as an American free leader of the free world, do not stand up in support of people like the Ukrainians and against people like the Russians, we will eventually see our democracy over here crumble and fail. And that's exactly what they want to do. That's exactly what the enemy is out to do.
Great, because we just came out of the speech by President Zelensky that your state has the highest per capita number of Ukrainian refugees of any in the country. I wonder what your thought is and whether you agree with President Zelensky when he said essentially humanity is failing its climate challenge.
He's right, and he's courageous, and his linkage of the climate change challenge and the totalitarian horrific actions by Putin and linking those two, I think, was very inspiring and accurate. And I'll tell you why. Totalitarian governments, tyranny thrives where there's chaos, where there's hunger, where there's a lack of stability. And nothing creates those conditions more than the climate change. You look at the Horn of Africa where people basically can't grow products there, and they're having to destabilizing governments. And you see Russia using wheat as now a weapon of war. This destabilizes communities, and when that happens, that's where authoritarian governments do well. So I think he's totally correct. I never thought I'd see in my time a Churchill figure, Winston Churchill, and I just have to tell you, his inspiration is incredible, and I'm glad he's in this position that he's in. Now we need the U.S. Congress to say, look, in 1943, we certainly should have not stopped fighting tyranny in Europe as we did in year 2 of that World War, and we should not stop now. And I'm kind of the Kennedy generation. I go way back. And when he said we will support every friend and oppose every foe to assure the success and survival of liberty, that's the attitude we should have right today. And we've got an ally right now in Zelensky and the Ukrainian people.
Let's take it back to climate change in this climate week, because we also heard from President Biden this morning. He said climate change is a priority. But as you know, the world looks to the United States to lead. Understanding where Congress is and understanding the obstacles that President Biden faces, has the administration done everything it needs to do to lead internationally?
I think the administration has done a crackerjack job. The Inflation Reduction Act was a tremendous step forward of $360 billion of investment. That is tremendous. But we need to go farther and faster than that. The president understands that, and that's why he's supportive of our efforts in our states to actually go farther and faster. So we have 25 states now in the U.S. Climate Alliance that are going further and faster. In my state, we have a cap and invest program. We have a low carbon fuel standard. We're going to stop connecting gas to homes and businesses. We can go farther and faster than the U.S. Congress because, frankly, I don't have to deal with Mississippi and Alabama. We can move forward, and that's what we're doing. And I'm glad now that we have states that can actually advance this agenda. I'm meeting with governors around the world, actually. I was just in Korea a couple of weeks ago talking to my colleagues, where states and provinces in Korea are moving farther and faster. In Australia, that's happening as well. So the federal government is just one of the people, the groups that need to pull on the rope right now. States need to do it, and we're doing that.
But is it not the most important? And I don't in any way mean to diminish the things that have been accomplished in Washington and these other states, but until other countries can look at the United States and say, here's a country that's leading, here's what they're doing, here's what they're offering as a path forward. Can it go where we need it to go? Because as you said, we need to go farther and faster.
Right. I think worldwide you will see that the world is now giving great props to the United States under the leadership of Joe Biden. They were certainly not doing that on Donald Trump, who still continues to argue that this is some kind of hoax. But the rejection of science here is fatal to us. The world now is happy that we now are leading on this effort. They understand that the Inflation Reduction Act was a game changer. And they do see 60% of the whole U.S. economy moving faster even than the Congress. Those are the states that are in the U.S. Climate Alliance that former Governor Jerry Brown and I started. So I really do believe there has a quantum leap in the last couple of years of the world actually seeing as leaders, we've got something to sell now. We've got to continue that. We cannot go backwards. To think right now when we have these fires, look, I had 300 families in Spokane County lose their homes in the last month from these horrific fires. Those fires have been doubling every single decade. The temperature of the water was 99 degrees in Florida. We're seeing the floods in Libya that might have taken thousands of lives. We are not going back to the Trump cult of saying that climate change is a hoax. We're going to go forward. We're going to lead the country. And here's the good news. We are doing it. Look, I'm an optimist on this. Everywhere I go, I find new companies.
Let me ask you about that optimism, because people have lived this summer
Right.
in a very, very difficult way. You mentioned Libya. Nearly 4,000 people were killed, and it made up to 50 times more likely because of climate change, what we saw happening there. The UN chief didn't mince words. Earlier he said it was a sad snapshot of the state of our world to see bodies wash up on the same shores where billionaires cruise in their yachts. And yet you say we have to be hopeful. I keep seeing articles in all the newspapers about climate depression, people who are genuinely physically affected by what's happening out there. How do you offer hope? What can any individual do?
Before he answers that, it has been only for the past couple years that some of the American people have awakened in regards towards the crucialness involved in climate change, environmental hazards that's happening all over the world. Thank God we finally awakened. We can't do nothing about what we didn't do 20 years ago whenever Al Gore was running for president. We can't do nothing towards what was discussed pertaining to science, pertaining to the oil industry 40 years ago. You can go back all the way back to Carter's era, and there was certain people that warned President Carter about this time that we're living in right now, and you know what their response was in the White House at that time? Get back with us whenever all that starts to occur 20 plus years from now or 30 plus years from now, where we're there and have exceeded what they was talking about 40 years ago. This thing has rapidly intensified just within the past 2 to 3 years of seeing what's going on with the forces of nature. It's basically the frog in the water theory towards putting a frog in the water and warming the water up gradually to the point that once the water's too hot, then it's too late. The frog has already done compassed towards having enough strength to get out of the water, and basically the frog dies because the water has already done reached the level of boiling. It's that type of theory of where we're at right now, that if we don't hurry up and awaken, and people such as myself that are putting out these advisories, that are putting out these warnings of major electrical disturbances and a bloody road ahead and etc. It's people such as myself that if we don't awaken from this stupor that we have been forced up into, not only does America not have a chance, but the world itself won't have a chance. So we're fighting for all. We're not just fighting for the Americans. We're not just fighting for one particular group. We're fighting for all, that this needs to be addressed urgently.
The most effective antidote to despair is action. Getting off the couch and taking action. That's what helps us defeat despair. And fortunately, this action is bearing tremendous fruit. Look, in my state, we're putting hundreds, thousands of people to work in dozens of new technologies. I was in a company the other day that makes artificial diamonds, Diamond Foundry. They make beautiful artificial diamonds. But they're also making a product that can get 6% more range for our electric cars, and an amazing thermal conductivity issue. We have a company called Carbon 14, Group 14, that essentially can make a whole new battery so our cars can run farther. We're getting people heat pumps, big time, starting with those who are most disadvantaged. We have the capability of doing this. My bottom line, if I was going to say one thing to you about climate change and clean energy, is we can do this. We have the technologies to do it. All we need is the will. We need the leadership. And we're going to deliver a new future for the country where we're not choking on this and our kids don't have an epidemic of asthma.
And that was one of the reasons why that it turned me off about Donald Trump, as well as what went on with the Ukrainians, as well as some of the other statements that he's made openly in regards towards being a climate denier. You got people out there that, I don't know, once they have made their decision towards making a statement, they're going to hold to that decision even though they know that the decision never should have been decided that way. They're still going to continue to blurt out what they're blurting out, because I guess they feel like that it's a prideful thing, a pride issue, and if you ever change course, then people are going to look at you towards being unstable. I hung Donald Trump's flag on my flagpole day before yesterday, leading up until last night, for a period of 24 hours. I was not hanging that flag on that pole because I support Donald Trump. I was hanging the flag on the pole because I like the logo of Donald Trump towards Keep America Great, or Make America Great Again. That was the reason why. Plus, whenever I purchased the other flags while I was down in Dyersburg, Tennessee, I told the guy that I would actually fly the flag. So he gave me the flag. He gave me the flag. He said, if you're going to do that, I'll give you this flag. He said, if you'll fly this flag is yours. So in order for me to fulfill my word, I had to fly that flag. And I did. I flied the flag for day from sun up to sundown, basically 24 hours. And then I dismounted the flag. But I did not fly the flag because I like Donald Trump and his crazy ideologies. The only thing I like about Donald Trump is that he did move for the United States military in a good way. He has brought it out to the world of how that the American politics is corrupted and that the swamp needs to be drained. And I did like his logo pertaining to Keep America Great, or Make America Great Again. There's just only a few things that I can actually specifically talk about Donald Trump about. But getting off of Donald Trump, going to the actual Republican Party, I can actually say that it was the Reagans and the Bushes and those that was associated with the Republican Party that created this resistance movement back 30 plus years ago in the late 80s, whenever they first initiated towards going to basically stifle me or cut me off or completely take me out of the equation regarding biblical Bible prophecy. And the reason why that I know this is because whenever that ordeal happened to me in Wheeling, West Virginia, pertaining to Jolene Nugent being my public defender, she let me know that anytime a president's life has been threatened, by law, they have to let the president himself know that your life has been threatened by this particular person. I never threatened the president. It was the dispatcher that working for 9/11 that went ahead and agreed to bring up false accusations that I had made an alleged threat, even though there was no proof of it. And then the federal judge acted upon to this guy's testimony, even though I backed it up with my own mini cassette tape player that Jolene Nugent played in the courts. The federal judge went ahead and moved on his on his assignment towards sending me to Butler, North Carolina, and having me examine a 45-day evaluation for this and a 45-day evaluation for that, and neither one could be held consecutively. In other words, they had to be held inconsecutively of one another, making sure that I was going to stay in jail at least for that period of time, which was basically 100 days or 90 days. Then it takes time to shuffle the paperwork around, and then you got, takes time to be booked in, takes time to be booked out, and by the time they get you on an airplane, send you wherever they're going to send you, they done burn up 6 months of your whole life for nothing. So you can't tell me that this movement has not come from the top, coming from Secret Service, coming from the authorities in that body at that time in Washington, D.C. that I can prove, I can verify. And the only reason why that I was going to Washington, D.C. was to tell those people up there to open up a can of worms, basically, and release the truth to them that the people that they was attacking, Saddam Hussein, which he may have been a ruthless individual, was the wrong people. That was not the great Satan. The great Satan is the one that is buddied up with the Americans towards being one of our allies, that our politicians say, well, they're not really our allies. We kind of got to hold our nose every time we get around them, but we are friends to them because it plays a bigger role. It plays a bigger role, would be my question. That's the very people that attacked us, that masterminded 9/11, and we're still dealing with them like they're our friends. And then here comes Donald Trump, and he goes over there and holds the crystal ball, holds their little thing that they think is their org or something like that can see into the future. Donald Trump and his wife was right there, budding right up with the Saudis. Donald Trump does not know who the enemy is. And other officials, regardless whether they be Republicans or Democrats, are still protecting the enemy towards leading us down a path of doom and gloom, basically leading us into the mouth of the volcano. So if the American people don't awaken after people such as myself telling them, you're on the wrong path, this is what's going on, if we don't change, this is what's going to happen, you have no one else to blame other than yourselves after you listen to this message and you comprehend the things that we're trying to tell you.
Electric cars, by having heat pumps, by having insulation in our homes, by having electric buses that we're now manufacturing at the Vicinity Corporation in Ferndale, Washington. This is a future that we can reach just in one lifetime. So there's a lot of good news on that. We should focus on that and get the job done. That's what we're about.
Governor Jay Inslee from the beautiful state of Washington. It's good to have you in studio. Thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate it. Up next, a House divided. Republicans grappling with the growing chasm in the caucus as the deadline to fund the government creeps closer.
More and more chaos. Good luck to all of us, and shalom. Thanks for listening. God bless America, and heaven help us all.